It's fine, because we don't have a lot of time today, so we're going to do a very quick lunch meeting. And the whole idea of this meeting really is that we want to present thinking that is from a Christian point of view. So this is what this meeting is about. It's really for Christian scholars, but everyone is welcome to be here. And the idea of faith and world engagement is about how Christian thought can be both relevant and also credible for the contemporary world. That's what we try to do. And I can't think of a better person to do this than our speaker today, VanderWeele, who gave a fantastic session yesterday, and he's going to share today about his new book, about the theology of wellness. I can't remember the exact title. But now I have to do the very difficult task of actually giving you his actual title, which is, let me see whether I can get this right again, because it's so very, very long. It's the J. L. Loeb and Francis Leland Loeb Professor in Epidemiology in the Departments of Epidemiology and Biostatistics at Harvard's T.H. Chan Group of Public Health. There we go. And so he's also the director of the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard. He's written over 500 articles, 5 books within the last 10 years. I think the last 4 in the last, published in the last 3 or 4 years. So he's been very productive. So he's been absolutely instrumental in helping us to think about issues of flourishing and how that affects not only our world, but how we should think about university as well. And also, in a way, to help us refresh thinking about theology and also how theology can speak into other disciplines. So join me to welcome Tyler VanderWeele.
Excellent. Okay. So a little bit about the book before I begin. I had for a number of years taught a course at the School of Public Health on religion, well-being, and public health. That was mostly just a course on empirical data and rigorous research demonstrating the effects of religious community engagement on health and lower risk of mortality, depression, suicide. Talked a little bit about partnerships between faith-based organizations and the public health community. And as I was teaching this course year after year, I began reflecting on the question of what does the Christian faith really have to say about health itself? Certainly community is important from a Christian perspective, and that was manifest in the data. But I thought, what else does the Christian faith have to say about our understanding of health? Love is so central to the Christian faith. Why don't we talk about love within public health? Where does that come into play? Or sin. Sin's a big part of the Christian story too, and don't seem to talk about it, at least directly, in public health. So does that have any role to play in our thinking about health? Or what are we to make of the passages in the Gospels where when Jesus says, your faith has healed you, the literal Greek is your faith has saved you. What is the relation between healing and salvation? And so that kind of began a longer journey with regard to trying to understand how do we think about health from a distinctively Christian perspective. There had been a lot written on theology of health care, what it means to be a good clinician from a Christian perspective, but I could find very little on health itself. And so about 10 years ago, I began trying to think through these matters more systematically. And when I taught the course in 2017, again, I thought, you know what, I'm going to conclude the course with a single lecture on what I take to be a Christian theology of health. And I told the students that I'd be sharing from my own tradition, from the Christian tradition on this matter, and that I thought it was important to come back to this question of what do we mean by health? If this is what we're pursuing at the Harvard School of Public Health, and what is it that we mean by health? And that each person suggested should think about this from their own tradition so that we could find points of common ground and also understand our differences as well. You could see few people surprised. The course maybe had 30% Christian, all faith traditions, and people with no faith tradition were represented there as well. But I think it was well received. People found it engaging, and my course reviews went up, not down, that year. And I continued to return to these questions again and again. And during my sabbatical, 2019, 2020, spent a lot of time trying to wrestle with these questions and begin to draft this manuscript. But there were still puzzles that I was wrestling with, and my sabbatical came to an end, and normal responsibilities returned. So it really wasn't until 2023 that finished the manuscript, and the book was published in 2024. So what I'll be presenting today really was a fairly long journey, nearly a 10-year journey of reflection. But I do think if we're serious about trying to integrate matters of faith into our academic work, it's important to do so early, gradually, continuously. I think sometimes it can be challenging, but if one is persistent and comes back to these matters again and again, I think that's where the advances can take place. But happy now that this book is now out. One can acquire it through the University of Notre Dame Press, but it's also available for free download through Project Views. So if you want to copy and take a look, you're most welcome to do so. The book is organized into three sections, sort of corresponding to notions of creation, fall, and grace. And each of those sections has a central proposition and then a bunch of sub-propositions, and the book kind of provides an exposition of all of those. In the appendix of the book, I've collected all of the sub-propositions and sub-propositions into an outline, so if you kind of want a quick way to consume the book, just turn to the appendix, read through the propositional outline, and you're more or less done. There is, of course, quite a bit more in the book itself than in the propositions and the outline, including exposition, but also interaction, especially in the footnotes with some of the empirical literature. So this was really an attempt to incorporate and integrate theology with empirical perspectives. It is principally a work of theology. It's taken the Christian faith as a presupposition and then trying to use that to say, how might we understand health? Each of the three sections also concludes with a section on implications, what I see the implications of this Christian theology of health. And the book also concludes with a non-theological postscript, where I tried to take some of the insights, especially from the implications, but some of the others as well, and discuss what I would take as the relevance of this content, even in the context of a pluralistic society. And so it is intended a contribution both to the Christian community and Christian thought and our understanding of health, but also to the broader public health community. Insights that may be able to be had from other sources, but I think become particularly clear and transparent from a Christian understanding of health. So part one is on health and wholeness. The proposition there is health is wholeness as intended by God. We'll be going through each of these parts in a bit more detail. Part two is ill health and sin. The proposition there is the cause of ill health is sin, not necessarily our own, but sin, wrongdoing generally. Part three of the book, Healing and Salvation, the restoration and fulfillment of health is salvation. So again, corresponding to creation, fall, grace. Another way to summarize the book in a single sentence, and we can more or less be done, is from the opening of Augustine's Confessions. Thou hast made us for thyself, Lord. Our heart is restless, always in ill health, until it finds its rest in the healing and salvation. So what I'll do here is I'll go through each of these parts and the propositional outline, at least at the highest level, and discuss a bit of the content, and then I'll turn to the implications sections, and then open things up for discussion and questions and so on. So part one, health and wholeness. Health is wholeness. as intended by God. A distinction that runs really throughout the book is that we actually have two concepts of health in ordinary language. There's the health of the body and the health of the person. There's a large philosophical literature on what is health, often debating whether a narrower or broader conception is reasonable. The World Health Organization's definition of health is health in a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. A lot of the literature on health criticizes that definition as being overly broad. How can we possibly do this within medicine or public health? This is unrealistic. And a lot of the philosophical literature on the notion of health is trying to place the notion of health on this spectrum from narrow to broad. And I think a lot of these disputes actually can be resolved by simply acknowledging we have two concepts of health. Health of the body. The body's parts and systems are functioning as they ordinarily do to enable the sorts of functioning that's characteristic of a human person. That's health of the body. Versus health of the person, of all aspects of a person's life. But one might also call that flourishing. I think a lot of the confusion in the literature arises from not distinguishing these two concepts. But we can find them even in a single sentence. You might say, he's physically healthy, but he's not a healthy person. He spends all of his life socially isolated. There we have health of the body and health of the person present in the same sentence. And so the book works out a theology both of the health of the body, but also of the health of the person, of flourishing. So it's intended to try to do both, but that distinction runs throughout the book. Second position here, the health of the person consists of complete physical, mental, social, and spiritual well-being. I said earlier that the WHO definition of health is sometimes criticized as being too broad and being unrealistic. From a Christian perspective, it's actually too narrow. It doesn't include spiritual well-being. And there have in fact been a history of attempts to get spiritual well-being embedded in the World Health Organization's definition of health. Those attempts have all failed. I think some of it is understandable insofar as if the World Health Organization were to open up a revision of the definition, that would really open a can of worms and there would be endless debate for now till the end of time. So one can understand perhaps they're holding their ground, even though there has been, I think, increasing recognition within the World Health Organization of the importance of matters of spirituality and faith. To accommodate this, we've often now referred to this, I think, more complete and satisfactory definition of the health of a person as being complete physical, mental, social, and spiritual well-being as the WHO plus definition of health. To acknowledge that it isn't there and it probably never will be, and yet we need a broader understanding. This is so important to many people around the world. This is part of the health of the person, not the health of the body necessarily, but the health of the person. So again, this is essentially synonymous with flourishing, or with all aspects of a person's life being good, as defined yesterday. Next proposition, the health is the body is constituent of and contributes to the health of the person. So one aspect of the health of the person is physical health, is bodily health. That bodily health also enables our pursuit of flourishing, the health of the person in other ways, allows us to pursue relationships or our purposes and so on and so forth. But again, the health of the person is broader, and as discussed last night, one can flourish in certain ways even in the absence of the health of the body. But the health of the body is part of the health of the person. The person, body and soul, was created good by God as an integrated whole. We see the opening creation narratives in Genesis. God saw all that he had made, and it was good. The creation of the human person, it was very good. There's a goodness to the body and the person, and there are remarkable ways in which the body can often heal itself. There's a beauty to that, but the body's not independent. The body is part of the integrated whole of the human person, and what happens to one part of the person affects part of the person. What happens to our body affects our social, mental, and spiritual lives. And Likewise, research has made increasingly clear, mental well-being, social well-being, spiritual well-being affects the body as well. We are an integrated whole. Position, the complete health of the person includes a flourishing community. If the health of the person is all aspects of a person's life are good, that would include the person's community as well. And so we need to think about communities when we think about the health of the person, when we think about our own flourishing. From a Christian perspective and perspective of the other world religions as well, the complete health of the person includes communion with God. That spiritual well-being is part of the health of the person. And again, from a Christian perspective, it is what is most important. And then lastly, health is the responsibility both of the individual and of the community, but also depends on circumstances beyond the control of either. But we're wrong to dichotomize and say, so it's just the individual or it's just the community. Sometimes perspectives taken from more conservative or liberal communities. No, really, it's both. It's both the responsibility of the individual and the responsibility of the community. But often, in spite of our best efforts, we are not able to attain the health that we like. And so that brings us to the second part of the book, ill health and sin. The proposition here, controversial in context, is that the cause of ill health is sin. Again, not necessarily one's own sin. In the Gospel of John, when crowd comes up to Jesus and said, of the man born blind, who sinned? Him or his parents? And Jesus says nothing. So there's not necessarily a one-to-one correlation between our own wrongdoing and our ill health, but understood from a Christian perspective that human wrongdoing, that departure from an orientation towards God leads to our ill health. Some of this is almost tautological, follows from the definitions of the health of the person is complete physical, mental, social, and spiritual well-being. And if sin or wrongdoing is understood as a deviation from a willful deviation from God's intent, then that is a lack of spiritual well-being. That is a lack of wholeness that's intended by God. So that any wrongdoing is part of ill health. It follows essentially by definition that the cause of ill health is sin requires an argument. And so first proposition here is that ill health is the absence of wholeness. Any absence of wholeness, either of the body or of the person, is what we mean by ill health or ill-being in the case of the person. Ill health often follows from the wrongful actions of ourselves and others. I think this is a point which, while the language might be different, is acknowledged in public health and in medicine. We talk often about violence, discrimination, rape. These are things that very clearly contribute to ill health. These are wrong. So health medical communities may not use the language of sin and may even be hesitant to say wrongdoing, but there are very clearly things that, even in the context of a pluralistic society, we do view are wrong and that harm others, and often harm ourselves as well in the process, either directly through bad, unhealthy habits or indirectly through a sense of guilt or shame. But often, ill health results from wrongful actions of ourselves and others. But there's also a communal, a more structural aspect to sin, to wrongdoing, to ill health. So wrong actions can bring about unjust structures that may result in ill health over extended periods of time, even across generations. And again, this is something I think the public health community acknowledges and takes very seriously, and rightly so. There can be structures, policies, laws, systems which are oppressive, which prevent people from flourishing or which lead to ill health of the body. And this too is part of human wrongdoing, from a Christian perspective, part of human sin, and something we need to take seriously if we're going to try to address problems of ill health. From a Christian perspective, it's also not just that our actions or our structures lead to ill health, but that human nature itself has somehow been distorted by sin, by wrongdoing. That fallenness has disrupted who we are as a person, as persons, but has also deeply affected our relationship to the world, and that can give rise to further external causes of ill health. And this is understood in different ways in different parts of the Christian tradition. The book, for the most part, well, at least drawing on Aquinas and times part of Catholic social teaching and tradition, also tries to take a fairly ecumenical perspective. So again, acknowledging that the fallenness of human nature is understood in different ways, but pretty much everyone has the experience of being conflicted, of kind of desires and emotions going in a different direction than what we think is best, reasonable, or our emotions being divided from themselves, or our desire and our will being divided. There is a division that we experience within our nature as human persons. And the Christian understanding would be this also is a result of that deviation from God's intent. Sin has brought about and continues to bring about death, and again, some of that's just through causal chains of leading to ill health, through violence, through the killing of others, through wars. But from a Christian perspective, it also has a spiritual interpretation. As we go astray from what God intended, there's a sort of spiritual death, again, a lack of wholeness as God intended. And if we take these things seriously, then we're also led to the conclusion that ill health cannot be prevented without addressing sin, without addressing wrongdoing. And this is something I think we also need to take seriously. I'll come back to this point in implications. And then the final proposition here is that the experience of distress over ill health, over ill-being, over our own brokenness, over our lack of wholeness is really what constitutes suffering, which is difficult, painful, but also points to our need for healing and restoration. So that brings the third part of the book, healing and salvation. So the proposition here is the restoration and fulfillment of health is salvation. And from a Christian perspective, it's not just a restoration to what might have been before. It's that, but it's also a fulfillment. Grace perfects nature. We're seeking something beyond, something transcendent, something more than we can imagine. That inner longing that we often have for something more than we're experiencing in this world. Even what we might dream as a utopia, we want something sometimes even more than that. It's again, not just restoration, but fulfillment of health. And I think that's captured in the Christian notion of salvation. So the propositions here in part 3, first, healing is the restoration of wholeness. That's often what we try to do in the work of medicine. In public health, we're trying to prevent ill health, and in medicine, we're trying to restore, we're trying to bring back a certain wholeness. But if we take the preceding material seriously, then that results in the notion that healing of the person, of our physical, mental, social, and spiritual well-being really can't fully come about without also a healing from sin, from wrongdoing. And this is something we don't seem to have perfect control over, in spite of our best efforts to limit wrongdoing, which are important and critical. It seems the task of completely eliminating that is just about impossible. But if ill health is caused by wrongdoing, then we can't really do this on our own. And so for Christian understanding, the principal way that we restore health and find a fulfillment of wholeness is brought about by love. By love of God, by love of neighbor, by caring for one another, loving one another, but acknowledging our need for help in that regard, our need for God's love. And that love is experienced from a Christian perspective most profoundly through Jesus Christ. Has brought healing and salvation through Jesus Christ. And how precisely this is understood does vary across different parts of the Christian tradition, but there's belief that in Jesus' life, death, resurrection, ascension, that there is a restoration to health of sorts, and his example of that life of love, and his taking, from a Christian perspective, our sins on the cross, and his resurrection and bringing new life, and then in his ascension, sending the Spirit and empowering the life of the church. And from a Christian perspective, the church and its members are both agents and recipients of healing, and that healing comes through in our day-to-day life, communal life, forgiveness, prayer, fasting, sacraments, broken character, the care of others, including the work of medicine. So we are in need of healing, and we receive that healing in various ways, but are called to be agents of healing, to bring that healing to the world. And in the life of the church, through our community, through the practices of prayer, forgiveness, fasting, sacraments, growth, and caring for one another, loving for one another, that healing can be partially brought out in this world, both in our own lives and in the lives of others. The next proposition, there are limits to healing in this life. We do all still, in spite of our best efforts, eventually die and struggle with ill health. But in spite of that, the healing in relation to God can come about in the midst of, and sometimes even through, our ill health, sometimes through wrestling with ill health of the body or of the person. We're led to greater spiritual well-being. But ultimately, a position we do wait for the fulfillment of that wholeness, the completion of God's intent, to communion with God, and that Christian understanding only comes about only in the resurrection from the life to come, which will itself be accomplished by God. So we seek wholeness here and now, and we try to bring it about as best we can, but ultimately that fulfillment will only come with Christ's return. So I want to transition to what I would take as the implications of this work for the practice of public health and medicine. First, I think greater clarity is needed as to whether we're speaking, when we're speaking about health, whether we have in view health of the body or health of the person. And again, I think this would alleviate a lot of the disputes that are currently in the literature. Second, what I would put forward, because a lot of the debate on the notion of health concerns, like what is medicine and public health really responsible for? I don't think medicine is responsible for all aspects of the person's flourishing, all aspects of the health of the person. The physician is not interchangeable with a life coach or a marital counselor or a pastor or priest. Each of these caring professions has a different role for advancing flourishing. So what we put forward in the book and also in a paper in a more academic journal is that the proper purview of medicine is not just the health of the body, that's too narrow, but it's not the health of the person, that's too broad. The proper purview of medicine is the health of the body, along with those aspects of that health of the person that are affected by decisions made about health of the body. So when we're confronting a decision about, say, treatment options, and there's implications for our capacity to work or sexual functioning or anything else, those aspects of flourishing, the health of the person, need to be taken into account. So that's what we put forward is the proper purview of medicine. It's in between those two poles of health of the body and health of the person. Purview of psychiatry proposes perhaps somewhat broader, the wholeness of the mind as it pertains to the proper functioning of the brain, kind of the functioning of the mind concerning the health of the body, but also those aspects of flourishing that the patient and clinician together agree through dialogue to address. And so this kind of allows for some flexibility in the practice of psychiatry. Some psychiatrists really may focus mostly on the proper functioning of the brain and the consequences of that for mental health, but in principle, if the patient and the psychiatrist share a similar view, or at least have some areas of overlap with regard to flourishing, with regard to health of the person, it broadens the purview and allows for flexibility in the practice of psychiatry. And then likewise, the practice of counseling, proper purview, so those aspects of flourishing that the patient and counselor together agree to address through dialogue. Given that there will be different understandings of flourishing and the health of the person in different cultures and religious traditions, put forward in this book the notion that there perhaps ought to be more space for tradition-specific practices of medicine. And my understanding in China is that when you go in to receive medical care, you're sometimes given the option of, quote-unquote, Western medicine versus traditional Chinese medicine. And I think those sorts of options could become more prominent and prevalent elsewhere also, so that if there are different values, different religious traditions that are being drawn upon, there could be tradition-specific practices of medicine. It could be sharing a common scientific knowledge base, but how that was practiced in terms of the care of the patient and decision-making could acknowledge some of these differences. My colleagues Michael and Tracy Calboni have a whole book on trying to envision what this might look like in the United States. But I think given that there are aspects of health of the person that pertain to medicine, in my view, this would be a reasonable thing to do. This proposition, the purview of public health and public policy ought to be those aspects of the health of the person or human flourishing around which consensus can be attained. And as I argued last night for those who were there, I think that consensus is broader than we often take it. Often we reduce it just to physical health and financial considerations, but I think pretty much everyone wants to be happy, wants to find meaning in life, wants to try to be a good person, wants good relationships. And so I think these other aspects of the health of the person, of well-being, should be a part of the discussion in public health and public policy. A lot of the work of the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard is trying to attain and achieve that vision in society. I do think, because again, we have, in my mind, consensus around these other aspects of flourishing in medical, public health, public policy context, we should start making assessments of human well-being, not just of physical health and financial circumstances. And that includes flourishing measure I presented last night. It's one way to try to go about doing that. And I think if we neglect it, we're going to end up with bad decision-making. An exclusive focus on the health of the body leads to poor decision. I mentioned last night as well, this conversation I had with a surgeon who said, Tyler, we know from our randomized trials that our surgeries improve years of disease-free survival, but patients come back 6 months later saying they want to die because the side effects are so bad. But that's because we're not thinking about the health of the person, only the health of the body. I do think psychological theories of well-being, which perhaps sometimes go further than what we find in public health or public policy, still are impoverished because of the absence of considerations of bodily health and character and virtue, community well-being. And so I think the view, the understanding of psychology and well-being needs to be expanded as well. But because the health of persons includes their social well-being, I think also we should start measuring social and community well-being, and that should come into play in decision-making in clinical context and public health and public policy as well. And there has been increasing interest in this. The Surgeon General of the United States recently released an advisory on loneliness and the importance of this for health. The UK now has a minister of loneliness. So gradually I think these ideas are beginning to be embraced. We have a long way to go, but the social, relational context needs to be a part of our discussions as well. Likewise, since the health of persons includes their spiritual well-being, I think we should give attention to tradition-specific understandings of spiritual well-being and start collecting data on these as well when appropriate, and have them inform our discussions of public health, public policy, and medicine. And then lastly, because health of the body and health of the person are ideals, health in both senses really are a relative concept. We're never perfectly there, and so we're doing the best we can. And even in the absence of health of the body, we can promote the health of the person and flourishing in different ways. Applications part 2, somewhat more briefly. Human wrongdoing should not be overlooked as a cause of ill health. And again, we do this a little bit. We don't typically talk about wrongdoing very much, but we do address particular instances of wrongdoing. But I think we'd be better off if we recognize the commonalities there. And I think that would then lead to further motivation also to emphasize matters of character. If we're to avoid wrongdoing, we need to try to shape ourselves and to shape our society to develop people who are aimed at doing good, contributing to the lives of others and the lives of themselves. That's important in maintaining health. There are character interventions to promote character that have been evaluated in randomized trials. We should be making use of these. Of course, we need to take into account the structural, social nature of wrongdoing as well. Injustices and unjust structures of the past need to be addressed if we are to maintain and address questions of health. And again, I think the health community has done a reasonably good job. We've got a long way to go, but takes these matters seriously, and rightly so. From a Christian perspective, I think respect for life, averting of abortion, euthanasia, is critical to maintaining health. Health is contingent upon life, and from a Christian perspective, that life is a gift from God, but something that should be respected. This isn't just kind of matters of what are our legal systems, but of caring for people who are suffering at the end of life, caring for women in the context of unwanted pregnancy, when financial or social considerations are making it very difficult to go on. We need to take these matters seriously, promote and enable life. Care of the environment is critical to maintaining health. There are these external causes of our ill health. From a Christian perspective, we are commanded by God to steward the world, its resources well. So if we're going to maintain health, we need to care for our environment as well. Implication, and I think because ill health wrongdoing does eventually result in death, the notion that we can completely overcome ill health and death in this life is a fiction, and one that we should resist. And I think this comes into play with regard to resource allocation. In the United States, a very large proportion of healthcare costs are in the final 6 months of life. Is this an attempt to avoid death? Might we spend those resources more productively, enabling flourishing at the end of life rather than just trying to avert death, and flourishing at other times, addressing ill health at other times in life? I think medicine, public health, public policy should be attentive to questions of suffering and not just to mental disorders and physical disease. That experience of our ill-being, wrestling with our own brokenness, can extend beyond depression or anxiety or physical disease. It can arise from a deep sense of loneliness, for example. And these other forms of suffering we need to be taken seriously. The Journal of the American Medical Association at present doesn't allow the word suffering unless it's to suffer some disease. We don't want to deal with these matters, but I think if we're going to care for the person, we need to be attentive to suffering as well. And then lastly, with regard to sin or wrongdoing, I think medicine, public health, public policy should be attentive to and address phenomena of moral injury, of a sense of having done wrong and wrestling with one's understanding of good and evil, of right and wrong, of the goodness of ourselves or others or institutions. And the scientific literature has begun to take this matter more seriously in the work of trying to care for veterans who come back and either have experienced or carried out actions that they couldn't believe were possible. And treatment for PTSD has been ineffective because not dealing with the moral nature of that wrongdoing. But this concept has been extended to struggles that healthcare workers, others are dealing with. And so I think we need to be more attentive to moral injury. Some of trying to expand those notions, what we've been doing a human flourishing program as well. And then finally, implications with regard to the third part of the book, healing and salvation, medicine and public health. I think need to pay greater attention to psychological, social, and spiritual pathways to health and well-being. There evidence now that mental well-being, a sense of purpose, is protective for physical health. Likewise, participation in religious communities. We need to discuss and take advantage of these psychological, social, spiritual pathways. I think public health institutions should partner with religious institutions on trying to attain their common ends, the promotion of health and healing. I think for those who do already positively identify with a religious tradition, we could encourage participation in religious communities. The effects, as I said earlier, on health outcomes are profound. And so I think it needs to be done carefully and ethically and sensitively, but I think even in the clinical context, if someone already positively identifies with a particular tradition, it would be worthwhile to just say, would you consider joining a community? You already believe and embrace these things, and the effects of that community participation are so profound. If we withhold that information, are we doing harm? And of course, other forms of community participation can be encouraged and supported for those who do not have religious or spiritual convictions or commitments. Likewise, I think character promotion should be carried out at local, national, international scales, and we now have evidence for promotion of gratitude or compassion or perseverance. We have interventions that work. We should be using these at all levels. Likewise, forgiveness should be promoted at local, national, international scales. Carried out a randomized trial of forgiveness in high somewhat high context here in Hong Kong and also Indonesia, Ukraine, South Africa, and Colombia, and we found effects of these forgiveness interventions. Simple self-directed forgiveness workbooks on lowering depression, lowering anxiety, improving hope, improving flourishing. We should disseminate these. We should help people who want to forgive and are struggling to do so. I think love should be promoted at local, national, and international scales to foster health and healing. We released a paper on the empirical evidence for the importance of love in promoting all these different aspects of flourishing. It's not something we find very often in our social policy, but I think if we're really going to advance well-being and social well-being, but also physical and mental well-being, we need to promote love. And I think this is, again, an insight that really comes to life from a Christian perspective on health. I would also argue that if we are to try as best as possible to ensure what the World Health Organization declares as the right to the highest attainable standard of health, we can't do that without love either. If health includes social well-being, we need love. And I think we need love to really carry out our works of justice as well. We're not going to get there without sort of more universal love of neighbor, love of enemy. I think in the context of a pluralistic society, there should be open dialogue around how different communities understand health of the body, but also health of the person, and what is ultimately most important. So we understand our areas of agreement and our areas of difference and disagreement, try to advance notions of health of the body and health of the person together. I think religious individuals and communities should be free to pursue their ultimate goals and ends in promoting health of the body and health of the person, human flourishing from a Christian perspective, of eternal flourishing in God. That concludes my presentation. Thank you all for being here and listening and happy to questions.
Tyler, thank you so much. That was great. And a lot of information there, particularly for people involved in public health. So we don't have very long. We're about 20 minutes for Q&A. So please have your questions ready. The rule is ABC, so please be articulate. In other words, please make sure you formulate your question before asking it. B is for please be brief. Make sure your question is short and sweet. And C is please be centered. Please ask questions that is focused on what was presented today. But apart from that, you can ask any questions you want. So are there questions in the room? Because we need to do this fast and furiously. Yes, there's a question here, and there already. Okay, and there. Okay, all right. One at a time.
Thank you so much for this nice presentation. I'm Jen. I'm from School of Public Health. So inspiring to say you integrate this in public health. I have two questions. First is you mentioned spiritual well-being. I fully agree with that. That's really important component. But in science, we always want to measure something than to say it's scientific. I'm recently considering that whether we can really measure that precisely. For example, when I see whether I have spiritual growth, I don't know how to measure it. So I want to know first, is it possible to measure it? Also, is it fair to consider it's a question we should measure it. My second question is, I feel it's really important for academics to consider our values from the Bible, but that's very different from the university's values. The university's expectation for us is like high impact papers, that's and small grants. Then how to let university get more attention from the university and get more support to do this kind of work. Although it may not go to like lesson or drama, etc., but it's really important and make the university get aware of this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Two big questions.
Two big questions. So, on the first, I'm of the view, with regard to spiritual well-being or measurement more generally, is that we can often go a lot farther than is initially thought possible. We do always need to recognize the limits of our measures, and that's very important in the interpretation. There will always be aspects that we cannot. There will always be aspects that we cannot measure, but often there are things that we can. And so we are working on tradition-specific measures of spiritual well-being. I think to do that well, it needs to be done across different world religions. There's no common question. The understandings of spiritual well-being are different, but we've done work on trying to assess faith, hope, and love, or sense of communion with God. And these questions, when we've been piloting them with different church communities, I think have led to a lot of reflection. Our first attempt at this, we had what are called ceiling effects, where there were too many 10s reported on 0 to 10. The second round, where we focused on the theological virtues of faith, hope, and love, we've sort of had the opposite, where people have found the questions extremely probing and have wondered about their own faith and practice. And so while it's taken some effort, it's taken a number of years to begin to do this well, we are working with church communities on spiritual well-being. Likewise, I think in the context of a pluralistic society, it would be good to have this for different world religions, to see if different communities see themselves as making progress towards those ends which they see as most important. So we need to acknowledge the limitations of that. I don't think one can perfectly measure the presence and operation of God's grace, for example, but I think we can go further than we have perhaps to date. On the second question, I think there's the question of values and ends and what are we aiming for and how we're understanding well-being and the health of the person. And there, I think it's important to hold the public health community responsible and to say, if what you're seeking is population health, the health of the body and of the person for everyone, then we need to take into account that that's understood differently in different communities. And we need to take those perspectives seriously. That a purely secular perspective is just one of many perspectives that are present in society. So this is a point I think there needs to be some pushback on values. With regard to our academic values, certainly it's the case that publications and highly prestigious journals are going to be valued more. I don't think there's any way entirely around that, but I think there's important work that's done that are not published in those prestigious journals. I think if we're to take seriously these notions, though, of the values of different communities, that may provide openings for the more high-ranked journals to publish some of this work. That takes a long time. In the meantime, what I would say is one can take a both-and approach and do some work which is valued by the mainstream of one's academic community, and some other work that they may view as fringe, but you view as more important. The relative emphasis may depend on career stage and so on and so forth, but I think pursuing both at the same time is often a helpful way forward.
Was it a question here?
Hey, Thank you, Professor Tyler, and your presentation is really relevant to my current research. I am a PhD student, and the research topic I'm doing is faith and cancer survivorship. So I am also in the middle of trying to design some randomized control trial on spiritual intervention. So thank you for highlighting some of the areas of research that I could look into. My question is actually kind of slightly more focused on one particular part of flourishing, which is for people who's already entered into the eventual decline of health when their health are unlikely to be restored. I was just wondering for late stage patients, community people like that, what are some of the key concepts that we should look into on the possibility of flourishing in that stage?
Yeah.
Thanks.
So we had recently published a paper on flourishing at the end of life, where we tried to take our flourishing framework but adapt it for end of life context, change 5 of the 12 items in our flourishing assessment that we typically use. And what we argue in the paper is that while at the end of life health will be on decline, there are aspects of flourishing that can still be attained, and attained in unique ways around notions of meaning, making sense of the whole trajectory of life in terms of relationships, bringing those to a satisfactory conclusion. In terms of character growth, and working through those challenges that suffering and of course spiritual well-being also. So while I think we won't be flourishing completely at the end of life, this is where the multidimensional nature of flourishing comes into play. And I do think there are aspects and ways which we can flourish at the end of life as well. So more on that in the paper.
Great.
Remind me, who else had questions? Can you bring your hand? There's a question there, here, and there. Okay, and there. Okay, all right. So,
So, my question is about while collecting those data, has there ever been a rejection from the church side? And since I know you're planning to collect data on year 3, 4, and 5, it hasn't ended yet. Has there ever been a decline that it's not correct, or it's, how to say, unethical to go in a church and do a data collection because this is such a private connection with us and God? Like, has there ever been this side of, like, from the churches just interested in the data collection?
Yeah, we haven't encountered much of that yet, but I think that could just be the churches that feel that way will decline to participate, so it doesn't come up quite so directly. But a couple of stories and examples maybe along those lines. A colleague of mine was trying to do a randomized trial, and this church network was willing to work with, and they were very excited about the intervention and seeing if it implemented in one church and not the other, would it have an effect? And then it came to the point of assignment of treatment, and he was trying to describe the randomization approach so that you knew the groups were balanced, and they said, randomize? No, we're determining who gets what by prayer. And so that was basically the end of the randomized trial. I'd say one place or a couple of places where some of these issues have come up is the concern of instrumentalization of religion and spirituality from some of this work and research. And I do think that there can be dangers, but to my mind, the way to address them is not to abandon it, but to enrich the set of outcomes that we're looking at. Let's not just look at health and happiness, but include spiritual well-being assessments. I sometimes joke with my pastor priest friends, like, we really could do a randomized trial on retreat A versus retreat B, and see who's praying more 6 months later. And I mean, we are doing a little bit of that work in some ways. And then one other area where this has come up is in there's just been more controversial randomized trials of prayer, intercessory prayer, and some of these trials have suggested an effect, some have not suggested an effect. It seems like almost every group of researchers who takes this on is biased in one way or another, either for or against, so the credibility of the research is questionable, but there have been more theological objections to this, and I think reasonable ones, that the prayer in a randomized trial of intercession, it's not what's typically practiced, which involves a relationship and the laying of the hands, not kind of blinded to who's praying for you, and it also sort of treats God as a giant slot machine. It's almost like he doesn't know that the randomized trial is going on. So there's theological objections to that sort of work, which I think are reasonable. So again, I think a lot can be done in a very reasonable, rational way. And in many ways, I think a lot of this research is just using our God-given capacities for reason to try to empower churches, and our Flourishing in the Church initiative is really trying to do that. But I do think there are reasonable sensitivities as well.
Samson, you had a question.
Well, thank you so much for the presentation. I come from a background of doing work in the area of addiction, for example, gambling. I think within our work, we talk about different traditions approaching this problem. One tradition is the religious approach. And I think in our sort of secular classroom teaching and perhaps clinical situation, we try to avoid adopting the so-called religious approach because of the sin, because of the labeling and the shame. So I think when I hear your presentation, I love the way you touch such an important area in terms of spirituality and sin. But my question is, would you need to contextualize it to avoid bringing the shame, judgment, all those things back to the public health arena, for example? Are you thinking the notion of sin more at a collective level? Because I think you do talk about it not individually corresponding. Instead of going to micro level, you are ill, you gamble, you are sick, things like that.
Yeah. No, I think one has to be careful. There's no one-to-one correlation. But I think from the Christian perspective, it's also the case. Sometimes a specific action does result in ill health of oneself or others. And so I do think one wants to be careful about blaming the victim, and I think there are structures that give rise to ill health. But I think there's also, as I said, a sense of individual responsibility. It's both and. It's both the context and the environment and the individual. And while I do think we need to be careful around matters of shame, I do think an approach of loving the other, regardless of who they are or what they've done, helps us to overcome that. But I also think we should take notions of wrongdoing and guilt seriously, and that there's the move away to completely not talk about those matters at all doesn't serve the person well either. I think addressing matters of responsibility and guilt in a sensitive way, in a loving manner, I think is important for full healing. So while I do think the sensitivities of the medical and public health, social work communities are reasonable and good, I think we've gone too far. And we're ignoring sometimes some of the underlying issues. I think there needs to be a slight shift backwards to address these matters in a loving, caring way.
All right, questions over there. I'm going to try. I'm going to do an exercise today. I'm going to click the people who haven't asked a question yet so far. Okay.
I'm Nicole Compatite, Faculty of Education. I've listened to two of your talks, fantastic, and thank you for giving us a lot to think about. My question is more about everyday Christianity and educating ourselves and each other how to be good Christians, and especially in a secular university. So I'd like to get your perspectives how to be a good teacher, scholar in a secular university, how to be Christian, because all these Christian ideals and values are amazing at a conceptual level, but how to live according to those in a daily life, that seems to be a challenge.
Yeah, I think it is a challenge, and to my mind, a lot of this comes to trying to live out the life of the church, the life that we're called to as Christians. As I said earlier, in position 3.2, it's really a life of love, a love of neighbor. even if one is ill-treated or feels excluded or discriminated against, trying to love in return. Jesus taught us not just love of neighbor, but love of enemy, even love of those who have ill will towards us, of forgiveness when we've been treated wrongly. And I very much wrestled with that at Harvard as well. But it has also been a source of spiritual growth. Learning that love of enemy, learning that sense of forgiveness. I don't think we can do that alone, which is why we need the church, why we need community, why we need the position that community life, that forgiveness, that prayer, fasting, sacraments, that growth, and caring for one another. So I think embedding oneself in the Christian community, whether that's in the university itself, or through one's local church community, is critical. I think having that community provides the support, provides a place to better learn to love and to forgive, but also a source of ideas to kind of bring some of the central aspects of the Christian faith into one's academic work. That's not easy necessarily. It takes time, and while I'm presenting this here in 40 minutes, this really was 10 years or more of reflection. And so I think coming back to these matters again and again. As a Christian, I really do believe the Christian faith is true and leads to true and full flourishing, and that I therefore have a responsibility to try to bring these ideas to the broader community, and as best as I can enable them to flourish, while acknowledging they may not agree with me on all matters. But I think that is what we are called to do out of love.
Thank you so much. We've run out of time because you have to dash. But I think the message is, and we should really adopt this for the university, is all you need is love. That would work, right? All you need is love. And it's true. It's very hard to love people at university. It's one of the hardest places. How do you love academics? Like
instead, notice more prominently.
This is a crucible for suffering. So anyway, but thank you so much for sharing all this with us, and we wish you all the best, because I know you have to go for more meetings and you have to fly back this evening. So thank you for spending this time with us. We really appreciate it, Tyler. Thank you.
It's really been a pleasure being with you here. I've enjoyed my visit to Hong Kong University tremendously. I'll look forward to the next time that I return, and I wish you all a full flourishing in the weeks, months, and years ahead. But thank you again.
Thank you. Yes, and one of the best ways to flourish is to be in community. So please talk to one another. There's more food, and enjoy each other's company. Okay.
Thank you.